The problem is multiculturalism in this country has failed. The scandal now, the current 2025 scandal, is the cover-up. Because the cover-up was orchestrated because Keir Starmer, local police and local councils and social services didn't fail.
They didn't.
They were complicit. This was an organised operation, not just on the street level with the British-Pakistani gangs, but actually this organisation went through into the police, into the councils, and into the care workers. You acquire this compromising material over politicians like Lord Nazir Ahmed, hang it over them and say, I've got this on you, you need to do what I say.
What's going on in these communities that this is even happened?
This is a problem in Pakistan, this is a problem in Afghanistan, and it's now a problem in Britain. By the way, there's a methodology to it. The thing you're worried about is going to come back with a vengeance if you don't speak the truth. Your desire to burn the country over these sorts of issues are founded on what? If you don't accept the traditions and culture of this country, you're engaged in subversion against this country. The failure of multiculturalism, integration, citizenship, Muslim belonging in Europe. It's got to a point now where we can't escape this question. We're literally at that decision point. Is there going to be a civil war, and do we all kill each other, or do we figure out a solution?
Before you hear from Maajid Nawaz, I ask, if you want to support this show, all you have to do is press subscribe. We're nearly at 300,000 subscribers, and 45% of regular viewers are not subscribed. So that's all you have to do if you want to help me get more great guests on discussing the issues and topics that you at home want to hear about. But without further ado, Maajid Nawaz. Maajid Nawaz, thank you so much for a long time in the making, and I think viewers will know who you are, and there's so many things we can discuss about your unbelievable life. I think that's a conversation for another day, and I think that viewers should read your book, Radical, which I did many years ago, and we became great friends. And you know, you've had many lifetimes: a time at LBC, your time in Egypt, and your time at Quilliam. And I want to say, on a personal note, why I'm so grateful for this is because you are one of very few people who stood by me in my darkest times, particularly when I was having trouble through a sort of cancellation episode. But you were one of very few people to publicly stick up for me. And for that, I will be forever grateful.
Well, thank you, Winston. That will also bear fruit. If you don't mind me announcing it here, we've already announced it publicly anyway, so there's nothing being broken. But the new show I'm working on will be called Cancelled, and that will bear fruit. You will, inshallah, as we say, be a guest on my new pending show, Cancelled, which seeks to turn 60-minute style serious interview on a network, broadcast globally, with a monologue, an interview, a panel discussion before a live audience with guests who have experienced some form of cancellation from the left, the right, the up and the down, all wings. It's not party political. You obviously, I remember that time, and it was very unjust what happened to you. You got cancelled for literally reading a book and posting about having read the book. It's absurd. It offended me at the time. Not only, of course, were you right, because, of course, the book was critical of the far left extreme. We have since seen how the far left extreme manifested itself not only in the fake, appropriated and hijacked anti-racism movement called BLM, using the donations that went to them to buy mansions.
$95 million.
It was a scam, right?
Yeah.
And I was saying on air it was a scam before LBC cancelled me. But the host of that show has been cancelled, which would be me, and the guests have experienced cancellation. So, you know, that will bear fruit. You stood by your principles, and
likewise you did, and you're rising again like a phoenix from the ashes. And I look forward to not only participating in that show, but also watching the other episodes. But this isn't about that. This is about you. And I want to, what we want to discuss, I think, is, and something we've been discussing privately, is relations in Britain, specifically between British non-Muslims and British Muslims, what it is to be British, Islam in Britain. I want to get into de-radicalization, and there's some big questions about what it is that unites all of us. And I think both of us have shown great concern about the direction of the country. I want to start, though, with the grooming gangs, if I may, because, of course, this is in the news. It's in the news because Elon Musk has given it global attention via X. You and I have been talking about it in our own work for some time. In fact, you have had severe punishment, or rather, I should say, backlash, I've noticed, not only this week from other British Muslims like Mohammed Hijab and Dili Hussein, but also historically. So you were co-founder of Quilliam, And in 2017, you did a report on the grooming gangs. Not only that, there's been a video of you, this perfect, I would say, magnificent rant, if a rant can be magnificent, decrying the scandal of the rape gangs. I think it was just when you were at LBC. I'm not sure what year.
LBC, that's right.
That was. So look, let's talk about the grooming gangs, because this is what everyone seems to care about. And maybe we start with your report, your 2017 report. Is that a good place to start?
Absolutely.
Like, what did you show in 2017? Why is that even now coming back up in the discourse? People are saying it's British Muslims, like those I've mentioned, have said it's been debunked. What, to someone who's not following, can you explain the story?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, let me start by saying that the report you've just referred to wasn't authored by me. It was authored by the director of Quilliam UK, Haris Rafiq, British-Pakistani like me. Of course, I was the founder of Quilliam, so, it's under our umbrella, but he authored it. I didn't write the specific text in the report, but I stand by the conclusions of the report with the caveat that it is out of date. So you mentioned the word debunked. What's debunked is the fact that at the time, there were 27 UK cities that had suffered from British-Pakistani underage rape grooming gangs. Today, there are 41 towns and cities. So,
well, GB News have reported up to 50.
Right, that's probably the case. The 41 figure I'm getting from the recent Daily Mail article with an interactive map, which I encourage everybody to look at. And it's got each town and city with a red dot. You can open up. You can see the names with all the mugshots of all those who are convicted in this organised sex crime. Now, the report, what it did and why it was in terms of in a conversation sense, why it was groundbreaking. Not that it didn't break the news of underage grooming or rape gangs, because that news was already out there. The work had already been done since at least 2003 by a brave Anne Cryer MP, Labour MP at the time. Now, she came to see me at Quilliam, and she was desperate, and she was a lone voice, and she said, I see you as somebody that would address this, and I'm pleading with you to raise this. It's a travesty. I was shocked at what she told me, and I could see the sincerity in her face, and I like to think I can understand whether somebody's blagging me or not, right? And she was really, really worried about this.
She was MP for Rotherham at the time?
Yeah, she was, I think,
Rochdale.
I can't remember that. Don't quote me on where she was, but she raised this, and then, of course, we began looking into it from there, because she came asking for personal help. And the rest is history. We know of those who followed the case know that Labour MP Sarah Champion tried to raise it. Everybody who tried to raise it suffered some form of extreme, severe backlash. And I want to get to why that happened in a minute. But the report, the groundbreaking element of it was we classified type 1 and type 2 offences. We said, look, we understand, which is what the apparent so-called debunking by those who are dog whistling for paedophilia are alleging, right? They say, look, the figure that the report mentions in terms of 80-something% of UK grooming gangs are by British-Pakistani Muslim men, right? That figure's been debunked. First point, yeah, of course it has, because there are now 41 or 50 or whatever cities, whereas then there were 27, right? So
the figure was 84% in that report.
So of course the figure is going to be different now, because there are that many more cases. Let's put the specific percentage aside and understand something. There's two types of offences when it comes to underage sex crimes, and those are solitary paedophiles. There's a stereotype of a paedophile that we all are aware of, that creepy old man behind the bike sheds, yeah? Solitary paedophilia in this country is roughly proportionate, give or take 5 or 10, 0 to 5%, roughly proportionate to the ethnic makeup of the country. That's what you'd expect to see in any normal crime pattern. And that is a proportionate representative of criminals in every community, because that's human nature. Human nature is that some of us do bad things. When you look at that is type 2, by the way. The solitary, lone, creepy paedophile behind the bike shed is type 2.
Type 2
offence. Type 1 that we classified in that report is underage sex rape or statutory rape, criminal sex abuse with underage victims in a organised gang context, which is very different to solitary behind the bike shed creepy man, right? Why is it different? Because when it's in an organised gang context, you're doing many things that the creepy man behind the bike shed isn't doing. One of them is you're normalising this behaviour in full view of everybody else in that gang context, including all those in the community. Because once it's organized in a gang context, like drugs, everyone knows who their local drug dealer is, right? It goes out into the open. And now, even in Islam, let alone in our culture in Britain, even in Islam, when you normalize a crime, that's a grave sin. We as Muslims are commanded to forbid the bad, command the good and forbid the bad. This is the only reason these Muslim supremacists are in defense mode right now and refuse to admit there's a problem. And they think that they are, as is in the Quran itself, right? Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas. You are the best nation brought forth to mankind. That should not lend itself to any false notion of supremacism. This passage, that we're the best nation brought forward to mankind.
I'm going to come back to who the Muslim supremacists
we'll
are
come to them,
a little bit later.
Because that is caveated. The only reason we could ever be considered to be favoured from God is because of the content of our character. If the content of our character lapses, then that favour is removed. And that very same passage mentions it. Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas. You're the most favoured nation brought to mankind. Why? Ta'muruna bil ma'ruf wa tanhawna 'anil munkar. Because you command the good and you forbid the bad, right? The word used is munkar, for bad, right? Munkar means something which is rejected completely and entirely by society. When you commit underage sex abuse in a gang context, in an organized gang context, you are making it public. You're no longer hiding your creepy self behind the bike shed. That's why it's a different category of offense. And it's also, I said, it does many things. As well as normalizing criminal behavior, it does other things. It makes it more efficient, because once you're organized in a gang context, you've got a supply route for drugs, you've got a supply route for the girls, you've got a driver who picks the girls up, you've got an abuser waiting in the room, you've got somebody else who delivers the narcotics, right? You've got somebody on lookout outside. You're making the whole thing a lot more efficient in an organized context. Add to that the power that you have in an organized context. So in 2002, Lord Rotherham, which is a trigger case for these grooming gangs, Rotherham, it's well known, right? Lord Nazir Ahmed was Lord of Rotherham, a Labour Party peer. In 2002, he was convicted for underage child sex abuse. Go and look at the BBC article. It's a headline story.
No.
The only reason that didn't capture our imagination is because obviously, sorry, I said 2002, 2022. We've come off the back of COVID and everything. We've been very distracted. When you organise it in a gang context, the final thing I'm going to say about why it's worse is because I said it makes it more efficient. If you've got the power to compromise politicians, such as members of our House of Lords, by having them come into those sorts of environments where this criminal conduct is being perpetrated, you've then got them engaged in criminal sex acts, right? And then as an organized gang, you can then manipulate them. This is exactly how
you think Ahmed was manipulated by an organized gang? Well,
he was certainly manipulated. The fact that by the end of it, how he got caught, he was basically molesting boys.
He got sentenced to 3.5 years and he's convicted for raping a 9-year-old boy. He only served 6 months.
Yeah. Well, by the way, this is exactly how the Krays operated, and we know from the historic story of the Krays that they were manipulating politicians. But this is exactly how they operated. This is, if anyone looks into the Krays, you can see it.
Yeah.
Right. So,
if you watch The Winston Marshall Show, you'll be quite aware of the many dangers of big tech and government censorship. Using the internet without ExpressVPN would be like trusting Kamala Harris without a teleprompter. Or Joe Biden with one.
So, end of quote. Repeat the line.
Every time you connect to an unencrypted network, whether you're at home or in public, you're basically opening the door for a hacker to help themselves to your personal data. Hacking doesn't even require much know-how, just a bit of cheat kit and AI. But here's where it gets serious. Hackers can rake in up to $1,000 by selling your information. You willing to take that risk? ExpressVPN creates a secure, encrypted fortress between your device and the internet. It would take a supercomputer over 1 billion years to crack ExpressVPN's encryption. That's not just secure, that's Hadrian's Wall in digital form. Sure, as the English Channel has protected us in Britain from invasion for 1,000 years, so too ExpressVPN will protect you. And it couldn't be simpler to use. Fire up the app, press one button, and boom, you're protected. And it works on all your devices. My favorite thing about ExpressVPN is that I'm able to access international geo-block content and platforms. As you know, X was recently banned in Brazil. Rumble is banned in France. With ExpressVPN, that is not a problem. In an increasingly censorious world with ExpressVPN, I have nothing to worry about. Secure your online data today with ExpressVPN and get 3 extra months free by visiting expressvpn.com/Winston. And by supporting sponsors of this show, I remind you, you are supporting this show also.
It's a well-known, tried and tested technique, and that is called, it has a political science term. It's called compromat with a K, right? And that is, you acquire this compromising material over politicians like Lord Nazir Ahmed, so that you can then say, hang it over them, right, over their heads, and say, I've got this on you. You need to do what I say.
So this is a whole other dynamic because, of course, people following will understand that the grooming gang scandal, it's kind of completely in the whole fabric of our nation. It wasn't just a failure of the ideology of mass migration, of multiculturalism, or it's a failure of multiculturalism, I say, but it's also local police failed, local council failed, politicians failed. But now it's also, I hadn't put this dynamic in it, but also that these gangs were deliberately capturing politicians.
Local police and local councils and social services didn't fail.
They didn't.
They were complicit. Failure indicates that they were caught off guard and didn't know how to behave. Maggie Oliver, who is a former police detective who was investigating a lot of these underage rape grooming gang cases, makes the very same allegation, that they were covering it up. That's different to failing. Failing would indicate a mistake. Covering it up indicates deliberate intent. Now, of course, not every single police officer, not every single local councillor, and not every single care worker is complicit. That's like not every single British-Pakistani Muslim is complicit. Let's stop being emotional about this conversation. Nobody is alleging every single Pakistani in Britain is a sex pest, every single police officer is a criminal, corrupt bribe taker, every single local councillor is a paedophile. Nobody's alleging that. Let's make that very clear. Mm-hmm. We're saying that there are points of failure in police, in local councils, in care workers, and in Westminster politicians, and in our local Pakistani British communities. Those points of failure are complicit, not accidental. They were deliberately set up to fail because this was an organised operation, not just on the street level with the British-Pakistani gangs, but actually this organisation went through into the police, into the councils, and into the care workers. And how this was covered up. So the scandal, credit where credit is due. Elon Musk interfered with how we do politics in this country by trying to unseat Nigel Farage. But credit where it's due, because he raised it at least and has had this comment. The scandal isn't that this had happened. What Elon may or may not have known is we knew this had happened a long time ago. Everyone was aware of the grooming gang scandal. The Times newspaper ran a front page on it. The scandal now, the current 2025 scandal, is the cover-up. And that's why Maggie Oliver's voice is so important. Because the cover-up was orchestrated because Keir Starmer, as Director of Public Prosecutions at the time, and that, for those who aren't British, that's the head of our Crown Prosecution Service. The Director of Public Prosecutions, DPP, he makes the decision whom to prosecute and who not to prosecute, right? And they are allowed, in the name of public interest, not to prosecute certain cases. That's one of their criteria. Keir Starmer was the DPP, director of that at the time, and chose not to prosecute a very well-known case in these underage rape grooming gang scandal cases. He chose not to prosecute it despite the fact that the DNA of the man was found on the girl's underwear. He chose not to prosecute. Maggie Oliver makes this very specific allegation, but it's also a matter of record anyway, right? Now, there's an example of the cover-up, right? That's the same Keir Starmer who chose not to prosecute Sir Jimmy Savile when he was DPP. That's the same Keir Starmer who now, despite all of this having come out, wants to appoint Lord Mandelson as our ambassador to America, despite the fact Mandelson is known, not in dispute, known to have visited Epstein's Island, to have gone to Epstein's mansion in New York after Epstein's conviction, and to have gone to Paris with Epstein for his birthday. Now, all of this doesn't imply guilt for Mandelson. What it means is there are many, many questions that require answers. And it does point to a cover-up. And so finally, I'll say, that's why we need, and it's a demand, it's no longer a request. We are demanding, and they can't run from this, they can't hide from this. We will not retreat, we will not surrender. Because the children are more important. We don't care. They can bring anything, they can throw anything at us. The children are more important. We are demanding a national inquiry. And if Starmer doesn't get out of our way, there will be a national inquiry on his head. We are demanding a national inquiry because what I've raised here, they're all questions. I'm not accusing Starmer of being a paedophile. I'm not accusing Mandelson of being a paedophile. I'm saying there are questions that need to be answered, and only a national inquiry can answer those questions. It looks to me like, and listen, I called 2020 with Trump. I called Ukraine. I called COVID, and I've suffered for it. I'm prepared to take the hit. That this looks to me like there was a cover-up, and there are questions that need answers.
Yeah, probably why we it's curious why they did that. Labour didn't want an inquiry, although as we speak, Sarah Champion, as mentioned before, who Jeremy Corbyn was forced to resign in 2017 from his shadow cabinet because she wrote in The Sun that it's a problem of Pakistani-British men abusing white British girls. She has now come out and said they want a national inquiry. Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham said that. There's a few big Labour voices now. Blue Labour, Maurice Glassman, have said, no, we need a national inquiry. So it seems like that aspect will change. Or rather, so there's a turning in the direction that you and I would like to see.
Yeah.
On the grooming gangs itself, I want to understand a little bit about why this happened, and we've touched on that. There's disagreement, and if we can rewind to an earlier point you made, which is that there's a bait and switch that happens that in the stats they say look at national statistics on CSE. And actually, it's proportionate to the population. But as you say, if you actually look at gang CSE, it's not the same, and it's disproportionate for British Pakistani men.
Highly disproportionate.
Highly disproportionate.
Yeah.
So, just leaving aside all the huge edifice that's built on top of this heinous crime, which has included, of course, like murder of young British girls, what is going on that this would even happen in the first place? What is the motivation? Is it what's going on in these communities that this is even happened?
So it is hugely disproportionate. You're correct, and it behooves us to accept that, which then it begs the question you've just asked: why is it happening? To say that this is a disproportionate problem among British Pakistanis is no different to saying that there is a disproportionate number of Albanians running cocaine drug gangs in London.
Agreed.
It's not controversial, right? It's been made controversial on purpose by the Labour Party in government, who are using racism and so-called Islamophobia. I think that's a misnomer. I use the phrase anti-Muslim bigotry. And I don't think we go into now why it's a misnomer. Let's
come back to that later.
Yeah, we can come back to it.
Thing, definition of Islamophobia.
For the moment, I'll use anti-Muslim bigotry or anti-Muslim hate, which is a real thing, right? But Keir Starmer, just as racism is a real thing. I mean, Keir Starmer's hiding behind racism and anti-Muslim bigotry.
Well, he did call them in his press conference. He said he used the term Asian grooming gangs. So it's almost like
that's like saying Eastern European London cocaine gangs. Come on, man. They're Albanian, man. Come on. I've got
right.
They're Albanian. They're Pakistani, and yes,
they're not Japanese.
Yes,
or,
at the end of the day, that's what we deal with. Probably the majority of sex tourists in Thailand are white. I mean, come on. Let's just stop pandering to rubbish when it comes to speaking about real, serious problems. And they're going to call them Asian. In America, Asian means Chinese and Japanese, by the way. It doesn't mean South Asian, right? So it's very confusing for people. If you go to America and you say Oriental, they're going to think you're being racist.
But also, it's even more specific than South Asian.
That's what I mean. It's British Pakistanis, right? Exactly. So let's stop pandering to. And for my British Pakistani fellow, brothers, sisters, my community, that's literally, I'm British Pakistani Muslim, right? I mean, literally from this community. My dad, 83-year-old father, fought for Pakistan in the war against India on the Badr warship, right? He's been in the seas lobbing missiles at India with the Pakistani Navy. I mean, come on, right? We are a Pakistani family, yeah? We've got to admit where there's problems in our own community. We've got to be real about this because once you can't address the problem if you don't diagnose the problem. And we're deliberately misdiagnosing it as racist. And I understand there's a concern that this is going to cause some form of EDL style. But that's why
there'll be an EDL style if we don't talk about it and we don't deal with it. So let's and actually that is a little bit of what we've seen.
Yeah.
The more the government don't deal with things, the more there's.
That's when you have a backlash.
That's why you had Knowsley, and I think that's part of what happened in the August riots. But what is the problem then?
The problem is multiculturalism in this country has failed. And we said it a long time ago. This isn't new. They just never listened to us. You know, we've been talking about this for many years. And there's a reason I shut Quilliam down when COVID hit. It was, by the end of it, it became a useless endeavor because nobody was listening. Why am I sitting here now? You've been asking me for a long time, because now's the time for me to come back. I've been subterranean for 4 years. People weren't listening to such extent. They're literally trying to raise my voice, right?
Yeah.
We haven't stopped. We've carried on, right? Quilliam's logo went from green to black because I'm saying we're now literally, you're treating us like pirates. I'll behave like a pirate. But the fact is, people are going to start listening. That multiculturalism failed in this country, and the people responsible, let's start from Tony Blair onwards, right? At the end of the day, Keir Starmer is a Blairite backing government, and they are destroying this country. They're using racism and Islamophobia as a shield to conceal their own complicit behaviour in these sex abuse cases across the country, but not just across the country, around the world. Why has he appointed Mandelson as our ambassador to the US? That needs an answer. I got cancelled for less.
Yeah, but sorry, multiculturalism failed. I agree that multiculturalism failed because there's been no dialogue about what is the common culture that we all share. Yeah. There's no proper dialogue about integration, and there's not been since Tony Blair started mass migration, which has been turbocharged by the Tories. We agree on that, I think. Yeah. But that isn't the... Why is it that these girls were targeted? I mean, if you read the testimonies, the girls will say they are racially abused.
Correct.
It's because they're not Muslim.
Yeah.
What is it about that aspect of that culture that this would happen in the first place? It's not that we don't have Sikh gangs. On the contrary, Sikh girls have been targeted in the same way that other British girls have been targeted.
If you don't feel like you belong in a country for whatever reason, in this case, if there's a methodology at play and there's ideological indoctrination at play, which is deliberately separating or atomizing certain communities from wider society on purpose, akin to the process of radicalization, right? And it's dehumanizing the other. If you had to manipulate, drug, beat, and rape underage children every day, you'd need some form of coping mechanism. These gangs are providing the coping mechanism, and that is through a process of you being permitted to dehumanize that other, either because they're white or because they're non-Muslim. That is it's a deliberately seeded coping mechanism so that you can continue working for the drug gang. So akin to the process of radicalization. If you look at the convicted Oxford case, for example, now we've done this work, by the way, because, we've worked with the convicted criminals across the sector when it comes to de-radicalization. We've been into the prisons, right? I'll tell you that in the sex offenders section in the prison in Oxford, when these people came in, they continued justifying their behavior in the name of their culture, which part of the culture is their false religious justification for this behavior. I'm not sure why people are so shocked. We know ISIS has been doing this for a long time in Syria and parts of Iraq. They have dehumanized the Yazidis and enslaved them.
False religious justification. So they are using... So it's because their understanding of Islam is that... I'm trying to understand this right. Yeah. Because their Islam, which you think is completely false, is the motivating factor. Plus, and the other is gangs deliberately trying to control other people in their own community.
Look, Islam is not the cause for this problem, but their view on how Islam treats the quote-unquote infidel is a factor in their behavior. Just as their view on them girls being white is a factor. So that's racism, not Islam, because of course you can be a white Muslim, right? So the fact they're non-Muslim is a factor. The fact they're white, racism is a factor. Their view on Islam is a factor. Their desire to profit from this criminal enterprise is a factor, right? These are all factors which we would do well to recognize. And if you're asking me that, is their view on Islam their deliberate misinterpretation of Islam a factor? Yes, it is. Let's get to Muhammad Hijab. Let's get to Mr. Dilwar.
So are these the Muslim supremacists?
These are Muslim supremacists. They are street preachers who are self-taught. Muhammad Hijab is on air, on video, preaching to New Muslim Sneeko, social media influencer from America, who doesn't know his religion. He's still learning it. And Hijab is there, direct quote from the video, says, "Paedophilia is very relative."
Yeah, I saw that.
That's a direct quote, right? Now, the reason he's saying that, let's understand let's steel man him, yeah? Let's steel man him, to be fair. What he's trying to say and getting wrong, what he's trying to say is that every society has its own legal age of consent, right? So France is different to Britain, is different to America. Now, the problem there is, and I said it to him, I said, you absolute idiot. Literally, I'm furious with him. I said, paedophilia is a clinical term, you idiot, right? Why are you teaching new Muslims their religion on camera when the whole world can see and saying paedophilia is very relative? That's like saying murder is very relative. Because what you're talking about, if you're saying murder is relative, you're talking about killing. For example, killing in war is different. So killing in the death sentence is different to killing somebody illegally, which is murder. They're all killing, but murder is the criminal act of killing. You can't say murder is very relative when you're talking about abstract. You say killing is relative. So paedophilia is a clinical and criminal term, right? So first of all, your entire content is wrong. You've got it wrong from the beginning. And also your tone was wrong. You don't approach a sensitive subject like this and leave everyone with the impression that if not for the law, you'd be perfectly happy perving on 13-year-old children as long as, quote, by the way, I'm not being unfair to the guy, as long as they've got round hips and big breasts, which is literally what he said in the...
Well, there's another video of him, I think, at Hyde Park Speaker's Corner. I think he's younger in this video that I saw, and he's arguing that according to the Quran, it's not halal to be with prepubescent women or girls.
So he says in that video that again, let's still man him. What he says in that video is there's nothing explicit in the Quran that prohibits prepubescent marriage, right? That's what he's saying, right? The reason he's saying that in that video is because he's arguing against somebody who rejects all hadith. And he's trying to say to that person, you have to accept hadith to be able to restrict prepubescent marriage because it's not explicitly prohibited in the Quran. Technically, right? Technically, that is a description of the Quran, right? But again,
I see. Okay.
Yeah, it's wrong. It's wrong. Why is it wrong though? Because as I've tried to explain to him directly and to many other people, Islam does restrict minimum age of marriage. It does restrict it. It restricts it by something called urf. Urf in traditional Islamic jurisprudence is accepted by all traditional Islamic scholars. Urf means custom, right? You are obliged as a Muslim on areas that are deferred to urf because the Islamic jurisprudential term for when you're allowed to marry a woman is when she reaches maturity, mental and physical maturity. Maturity as a phrase is left to the custom to decide what maturity means, right? And so the minimum age for marriage in Britain is left to the custom of Britain. And part of the custom and tradition of Britain is the law, but even above the law, there's more custom, right? So we know there's a difference between rape and statutory rape. And so even when you're in a, for example, codependent context, you could statutorily rape somebody who's above the age of consent, for example, in certain contexts, such as teaching. So all of that is part of the custom. So that's how you approach this conversation. If you're trying to preach Islam, you begin by saying it's not allowed. You explain why it's not allowed. You explain the custom of the country the person is in, right? And build up from there and saying, therefore, the Islamic ruling on underage sex is you must obey the law of the land. That is the Islamic ruling because of this point of urf and custom. Hijab has got it completely the wrong way around. He started with the literalist view on when Muhammad married Aisha, right? Now, again, if you understand what I've just said about custom, you'll understand that the custom for Bedouins back then was very different to the custom today. Even in Britain, the custom 200 years ago was different to the custom
today. Do you
today.
think the Prophet Muhammad did marry Aisha?
Her age is a matter of great dispute.
Because Ed Hussein came on this show.
He definitely married her. Her age is the issue.
Age 6.
No, I don't think so.
Because what is the story about that? Because it seems like I've heard other Muslims talk about that and use it as justification. What would you say is the truth about Prophet Muhammad's wife, Aisha?
The truth is he did marry Aisha. That's a fact. He married her according to the custom of what was with the desert Bedouins at the time, right? And that age is because they didn't keep age, right? So my dad, by the way, this helps explain it. My dad, I said he's 83, yeah? My Pakistani Navy war veteran father. He's 83 because he guessed his date of birth.
But if they're guessing that she's 6,
right? No, they're not. That's not in the Hadith 6. That part's not even in the Hadith anyway. So the question is,
so where did that number?
People aren't really aware of the theological, but the number is 11 that you really want to be looking at, right?
Which is when they got married.
Is when they consummated, which allegedly when they consummated the marriage, right? They're guessing the age. Now, the thing is, that's not anything to go by. When you understand Islamic jurisprudence, you're not going to retrospectively try and apply a number to a desert Bedouin. If you're going to do that, you can go to Moses, you can go to Jesus, you can go to all of the prophets and start doing the same thing, right? And you end up in a lot of trouble because it doesn't work. Of course, it doesn't work.
Guessing their ages.
A lot of the Old Testament prophets are engaged in relationships with whether it's in marriage, out of marriage. A lot of these stories.
Do you think Jesus was?
No, not Jesus.
No.
But a lot of these stories, when you look at them retrospectively with or anachronistically with today's lens on, they're going to start looking very strange, because it's a dangerous thing to do, to try and apply the customs of what we think is normal today retrospectively on people back then. Now, people in response to this will say, yeah, but the Prophet's perfect. Surely everything he did literally is what you Muslims follow, right? That's, again, not true. It's absolutely not true that everything he did literally is what we follow. That's literally the literalist's perspective on it. And why are we validating the literalist approach to interpreting scripture, even as a non-Muslim? Right? That's my issue with people. It's like, don't tell me what the religion is because you've been reading Al-Qaeda manuals. Don't tell me what the religion is because you've been listening to Muhammad Hijab. There's for example, on this point of following the Prophet literally, yeah? There's a very specific hadith in Arabic where he says, "Antum a'lamukum bi shu'uni dunyakum," which means you're better aware than me, as a prophet, him, on your worldly affairs. And that was in the context of crops and how to plant crops. And somebody asked him how to plant crops, and he said, "Do this," and the crops failed. And then the person came back to him and said, "Prophet of God, you told me how to plant crops, and the crops failed." And he says, "Antum a'lamukum bi shu'uni dunyakum." You know better than me about your worldly affairs. What are you asking me for in the first place? This, among many, many other scriptural traditions, indicate that we don't just copy literally. So, marriage and Aisha, right? The Prophet engaged in marriage according to the customs of a Bedouin desert tradition, which in those days, when you didn't have social welfare, when you had wars and men getting killed in wars and caravans being raided and no street lights where women could be attacked because you're in a pitch black desert, the customs around marriage, with marriage, not teenage promiscuity, with the approval of the tribe, were very different. They were very different, and what they defined as maturity was the onset of puberty. Right? And they had a very specific marker for puberty, and that was menstruation. Now, those customs have changed. Did Islam specify a specific minimum age for marriage? It said, yes, it did. It said you refer to the customs of the society you live in and you follow those. And that is a very simple answer to this issue, right? And so Islam wasn't silent on it. And Islam didn't say it's legal to marry an 11-year-old. It said it's not legal. You follow the customs of the society you're in, and that is what is legal, and that's what you're obliged to follow.
But then it sounds like it's still a problem. If Muhammad married Aisha at 11, that still seems to be part of the problem with what's going on today.
With literalists, yeah.
With literalists.
Yeah.
Because whether it's 6 or 11, it's still a child, right? So is that
11's also a figure. I'm saying that's the figure they use. I'm saying forget 6, that's just ridiculous. But 11 is a figure that is out there. I'm saying I'm not even, because these are guesses, right? Could be 15, it could have been 18. This is something which people are retrospectively trying to guess the age of somebody who had reached menstruation, right? And they're trying to work out what age that was from 2025. I'm saying that none of that matters in the first place if you not understand that we follow the custom of the society we're in. The age itself, the specific age, becomes irrelevant, because even those who claim it was 11 don't say, therefore, that 11 is the age. Even the literalists, they don't say 11 is the age. They say, oh, because she was 11, it means there's no lower limit, which is the problem I'm saying that they have with their interpretation, because that's the wrong element.
And it's also, if they believe that, which you don't, that the Prophet was perfect, everything he did was perfect, then that's where you get, it's a kind of jumble of those
exactly,
problems, right?
Because the perfection element, that's in matters of revelation. This isn't a matter of revelation, and that's something, again, traditionalist scholars all accept, right? That how he dressed is not a matter of revelation. The fact he rode camels and not automobiles is not a matter of revelation, right? The fact that he wore a turban and not a woolly hat is not a matter of revelation. So the perfection element is in matters of revelation or deen or religion, right? So, for example, He taught us how to pray. He taught us how to wash before prayer. These are matters of religion, right? Outside of those, which is back to that hadith, Antum a'lamukum bi shu'uni dunyakum, in the worldly matters, or shu'uni dunya, which is what the specific text of the hadith says, in the matters of the world, these are not matters of revelation. In battle, and it's no secret, the Prophet, engaged in battle. We're not pacifists. There are certain times when war is just. In matters of battle, strategy. He was questioned on the battlefield. Is that the best strategy? Should you be behind the mountain or in front of the mountain? These are real examples. And he said, sure. And he would take counsel on these matters. That's known as shura, to take counsel. So the perfection, again, that's why I say these are self-taught street preachers who don't understand not only the scripture that they're attempting to preach on the streets, but also their tone. They don't understand how to approach discussing this in a manner that is helpful instead of harmful.
So if on these Muslim supremacists or these types like Mohammed Hijab, what I've been concerned about is their voices are the loudest. Yeah. And so I think this is added to the division, because when most British non-Muslims probably don't have that many British Muslim friends, and the ones they do hear from are these types because they're going on Piers Morgan, Dilly Hussein, the like, and we hear them and we go, oh my goodness. I mean, if I can go just to hammer the point of how worried I am about this. Yeah. Because, by the way, I thought you, the Quilliam lads, Haris Rafiq you've mentioned, and Ed Hussein were that great voice before COVID, and as you said, you've disbanded Quilliam. But even last month, Sayeeda Wasi, the Conservative Lord Peer, endorsed a report by the Muslim Council of Britain, i.e. the most prominent voices of what is supposed to be the normal voice of British Muslims, which said that the grooming gangs were so-called, I quote, so-called, and put grooming gangs in inverted commas. So that was last month.
Yeah, by the way, I've been doing that.
As mainstream as you come, Sayeeda Wasi.
I've been doing that because they're actually underage rape gangs. So
That's not what they meant.
I know. But just to explain to people why I'm doing that is because they're underage rape gangs. Grooming is too soft a term on them.
Agreed. Yeah. But they see the implication is absolutely that they were underplaying what they was.
And I know. I'm aware.
Yeah. So it's not just these guys that I would say radicals.
Correct.
I mean, Dilly Hussein. I want to understand 5 pillars as well. But so this is the picture. This is what I'm so worried about.
Mr. Dilawar Hussein is a former member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, which, against my advice, is now a proscribed organisation in Britain. I don't think it should be, but nevertheless it is.
It shouldn't be.
No, it's not a terrorist organisation. It's an extremist organisation, but that's a different topic. Fact is, he's a former affiliate of Hizb ut-Tahrir. If I said member, definitely an affiliate. Could have been a Daris or a Hizbi. They had 2 stages of membership and affiliation. And he had been throughout his youth. And so that explains his behaviour. And hijab, I believe, is a Muslim supremacist. But you mentioned Wasi and the others. At the end of the day, there is a culture of denial that has been allowed to pervade our so-called community leaders. And the problem with these community leaders is they act as gatekeepers for the discourse. They refuse to allow any dissent on the established discourse. And anyone who seeks to question the established discourse among these community leaders is immediately outcast. And you've witnessed how that happens with us. I don't care.
I've seen it. You only this week, the amount of pushback you get from these people. They say you're not a real Muslim. It's like it's appalling that they would treat you like this.
But let's also broaden it, Win, and be fair, right? I've been cancelled by them, but I was cancelled by LBC for questioning COVID. I was cancelled by, let's call it, polite society for the COVID stuff and the Ukraine war.
When you
stuff.
go against your own tribe,
right,
you are punished.
Yeah,
I know that as well.
And the problem here is why am I mentioning it at this juncture though? Right, not for sympathy, is genuinely we need to start getting real. If we don't recognise that often, not always, but often, the voices that are attracting the most hate are because they're onto something and they're over the target. And if we don't start in solidarity, supporting them instead of conveniently letting them go by the wayside because there, but for the grace of God, go I, right? And then thinking, thank God that's not me. What happens eventually is the shit show, sorry for swearing on your show, that we eventually see today that Britain is, right? What we needed to have done a long time ago was support what we were trying to do with counter-extremism, what you were trying to do with the Antifa stuff, right? What we were trying to do on the COVID stuff, right? or on the now on the grooming gang stuff. This is all stuff that isn't new, that people didn't support. Now look at Britain today, right? Look at what happened as a result of us all standing on the sidelines. So yes, this Wasi and the community gatekeepers have, Wasi isn't a Muslim supremacist, but she does have to move on these topics. And whether she likes it or not, she's going to need to move on this topic of underage rape gangs. Because the fact is, there is a disproportionate number of British Pakistanis engaged in the organised gang context of this type of underage sex crime, just like that Albanians in London are disproportionately represented in the drug trade. That is not a controversial thing to say. If it is a controversial thing to say, then we're in a real problem, because then we're in denial of facts. And the denial of facts is what got us to this stage. Let's leave the figure. It doesn't matter what the figure is that Harris's report originally arrived at, because even the case data is out of date now. It's like double the cases, or triple.
You mean the
figure
84%?
Yeah, 84%. Because that figure was on an old report when the case data was at least a third of what it is now. We've got more evidence now, not less, right? And if you, let me, for Wasi's sake, let me just explain something to her calmly. So I hope people listen to this rationally, right? I know I'm animated, but everyone should be animated with the question of underage rape, right? But let me explain something calmly. The population of Britain's Muslims, the percentage of Britain's Muslims is under 10%. France is 10%. Let's say we're around 6% in Britain, right? And that's kind of rough, right? Not all of those are Pakistani. So let's first of all remove the women, because all of those convicted for underage rape gangs are men, right? So if Britain's Muslims are 6%, take 50% away from that, which is women, and you end up with 3% of Britain's Muslims are adult males, yeah? But remember, some of them are children, right? But still, okay, let's say 2.5% are adult males in Britain. How many of those 2.5% are Pakistani? Now, we all know that there's loads of Somalis in this country. There's loads of Afghans. There's loads of Persians, right? They're all Muslims. There's loads of Albanians are Muslims, by the way, right? So how many of that 2.5% adult male Muslims in Britain are Pakistani? Again, let's be generous, right? Let's say 1%. Even though there's loads of Bangladeshis too, right? But and Indian Muslims. I mean, Muslims are from all over the place. Let's be generous and say 1% of that 2.5% of adult males in Britain are British Pakistani Muslims. Okay, therefore there should be, if there's 1% of adult males in Britain who are Pakistani Muslims, that should be proportionately represented in type 1 sexual offence cases, which is the grooming gang or underage rape cases. There should only be 1% of those crimes reflected, right, in the fact that they are British Pakistani. Is that the case? Right? Even if the report that Harris wrote is out of date now, are we seeing a 1% figure? This is what people need to get real with and understand, right? That there will be a hugely disproportionate number. It will be way more than 1% of those crimes are perpetrated by British Pakistani Muslim men. Even if it was only 6% of type 1 offences are underage rape gangs are Pakistanis. That's 6 times more than there should be. And it's way more than 6%, right? So people don't understand the extent of the problem. And the problem, even in Pakistan, exists. It's called bachabazi, right? Everyone who is Pakistani knows exactly what I'm talking. Anyone who's Afghan knows exactly what I'm talking about. Bachabazi is underage rape. It happens in Pakistan, it happens in Afghanistan, and this culture has been brought here. It's not Islamic, but it's been brushed under the carpet by people who are in denial. And to the extent where if you look up
So it's not Islamic, but it's specific to that little corner of the world.
Yeah. But justified, of course, always justified. But in fact, even with the US bases...
Justified in some Muslims will try and justify it through Islam.
Yeah, of course they will. And even if you look in Afghanistan, when NATO forces were there, a Slate article, I believe it was Slate, the US Army ordered their troops to turn a blind eye to this. Right, look up Bachabazi. Just search it online. Bachabazi, which is Bachabazi, Bachabazi. US Armed Forces, Afghanistan, turn a blind eye. And you'll see the article, right? I'm happy to do it right now for you, but I don't imagine there's time. And the fact is that this is a phenomenon. Let's get real, Ms. Wasi, right? Baroness of the realm, right? Let's get real. This is a problem in Pakistan. This is a problem in Afghanistan. And it's now a problem in Britain. By the way, there's a methodology to it. You got some old fat uncle, right? So the leader of the one of these cases, Qari Abdul Rauf, right? Qari, by the way, Qari Abdul Rauf. Abdul Rauf is his name. Qari means it's an honorific title you give somebody who has trained in the art of reading the Quran. And he's in the news articles listed as Qari Abdul Rauf, the leader of the, I think that one was the Rochdale one, right? If memory serves me correctly. He's wearing a prayer hat. He's got a beard. Come on, guys. Don't tell me this isn't a problem, right? Right? And the fact is that what they're doing is some fat uncle in his apartment above a shop somewhere is sending his nephew in a fast car to go to bloody, vulnerable children, ply them with drink, drugs, and all manner of narcotics, get them above in that flat, and then the uncle's like, "Thank you, sir," and he's indulging himself, right? And it's all normalized because it's all part of this underground horrific bachabazi culture. Now, whilst he knows that exists, she knows for a fact that's a problem, right? To be in denial is because people are more concerned about PR image of Islam, of Muslims in Britain, and of making sure there isn't a racist backlash. And by the way, none of these people speaking have suffered racist attacks the way I have in this country. None of them. Certainly not Sayyid Awasi, right? I'm talking violent, physical, knife stabbing attacks.
This is growing up in Essex.
Yeah.
I remember you were attacked in Soho, weren't you, a few years ago?
That's what this scar is here, which if you look closer, you'll see. But that was mild compared to, I mean, he tried to stab me in the eye with his key, but that was mild compared to what I've been through with machete attacks and been arrested at 15 by police at gunpoint after being profiled. So I know what racism is in this country, more so than the Baroness of the Realm, more so than middle-class, Oxford-educated Muslim supremacist Muhammad Hijab, frankly, who tries to conceal from the people that he's Oxbridge-educated, right? At the end of the day, he's privileged compared to what I've been through. I never went to Oxford, never went to Cambridge, never went to private school, right? All of them look like privileged kids to me. At the end of the day, this is a culture. These people are worried about racism, so they're on hyper defense mode. Now, it's legitimate to be worried about racism. What they need to understand is the thing you're worried about is going to come back with a vengeance if you don't speak the truth.
Exactly. That's exactly the way to deal with all of that. The worry about a backlash is to make sure that these evils don't happen in the first place.
100%.
You sort that out, then there won't be a backlash.
Yeah.
Look, I want to get to the white pill, the optimist view, of which I actually do have an optimistic opinion, and I think we might share this. And it plays out on the geopolitical side, on the global side, and I'd like to talk about the Emiratis and others and the great things they're doing. But if I can paint the black pill a little bit further, because I think it's worth exploring, like the problem in Britain. Yeah. So we've discussed what we've discussed as already, but there's so recently in the House of Parliament, we saw one Labour MP named Tahir Ali arguing in favour of blasphemy laws, of which Gordon Brown had outlawed in 2008. We had an independent MP, Iqbal Mohammed, I think was his name, arguing the case for cousin marriage. Cousin marriage is another problem in amongst British-Pakistanis. FGM, it's 135,000 victims of FGM in Britain.
That's not Pakistani, that one.
It's not?
That would be Somali. It could be Egyptian, but mainly probably Somali because there's not a large Egyptian community in Britain.
Okay.
Yeah. Pakistanis don't engage in FGM.
Right.
Yeah. It's probably around zero.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, 0.01% or something. It's not an issue at all.
But it is still a problem if we're talking about Islam.
British Muslims, definitely.
British Muslims, yeah. And then there's the Henry Jackson Society report from 2024, which included this actually is quite. We're talking about blasphemy laws. 52%, according to this report, want it to make it illegal to show images of the Prophet Muhammad. Yeah. Almost half of British Muslims say Jews have too much power over the UK. Hamas is majority of British Muslims have a positive rather than negative view of Hamas, and 32% of British Muslims favour implementation of Sharia law. We have 85 Sharia courts, according to a 2015 Daily Mail report. Mm-hmm. So I just paint the black pill again when we see these speeches in Parliament. And if we're not familiar with Islam or the British Muslims, it's really quite shocking.
Yes.
How should one make to add to all of this? Of course, there's the APPG definition of Islamophobia, which I think misconflates Islam I think we've touched on this earlier in this conversation, as a race rather than a religion, which is why you're right to point out the problem is anti-Muslim hate rather than anti-Islam. We must be able to criticize all ideas and faiths. I know that you and I agree on this, but I'm painting the black pill because I want to get to the white pill, and I think if we don't talk about what the problems are, do you disagree with anything I've just said? Do you think that that's
cousin marriages needs to be stopped in Pakistani communities? It's not good for your genes. It's not good for it's not good for anything. It's not good for your kids. All of what you said. Anti-Muslim hate is a more accurate term. There's clips of me still up online from LBC days trying to argue this. I mean, I've never backtracked on that point. I think anti-Muslim hate, calling somebody an anti-Muslim bigot, or you are anti-Muslim, is easy. It's not a complicated phrase. It says exactly what you mean. If you say Islamophobia, it's confusing. Is me saying, that a justification used by these underage rape gangs is their view on the so-called infidel? Is that Islamophobic for me to say? It's difficult to then be precise about what you're pointing to if you're using the phrase Islamophobia. And I've been saying this for a long time. It really complicates the conversation. My challenge to these Muslim supremacists, if you think about it, our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you're going to be literalist about it, if you're going to be literalist, my challenge to them is specifically, literally, find me the specific and literal prohibition of depicting, even nicely, as the Persians used to, right, which is why the Shia used to do it. Where is the specific literal prohibition of depicting the Prophet Muhammad? There is a prohibition on worshipping the graven image. That's different. Because what about if you're depicting it not to worship it, as the Persian Shia and some Sufis used to do? We've got all those. I mean, come on, it's all there as a matter of historic record. They are unable to. What they'll do is they'll give you general verses like, those who declare war against Allah and the Messenger. Yeah, if you're literally burning a copy of the Quran and depicting the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as some form of, unkind depiction, it could be argued that you're declaring war against Islam. What if you're what the Persians used to do and what the Sufis used to do? What if you're literally just drawing a nice image, right? There is no specific, I'll guarantee you this, right? There is no specific prohibition on depicting the Prophet Muhammad in a nice, kind way. I don't do it. Why? Because I'm not Persian. I don't come from that tradition. I'm a Pakistani Sunni Muslim. That's not my tradition. I don't do it. What I'm challenging them on isn't to say it's halal, in case they want to misconstrue what I'm saying right now, like they like to do. I'm saying your desire to literally burn a country over this is founded on what? I can say I don't do it and I don't agree with doing it, and I've never done it. The one thing I've said is, Allahu Akbar minhu, which I posted online. Allah's greater than this depiction of this image that somebody was wearing on a t-shirt. My point is that your desire to burn the country over these sorts of issues are founded on what other than your ego and other than your asabiyya, which is a term in Islam, which means your tribalism. Yeah, but tribalism from an anger perspective, from a brutal kind of aggressiveness. That's where it comes from. So whether it's, and that's the problem with the phrase Islamophobia, by the way, because what it does is it captures legitimate critique, legitimate conversation, and it also captures praise, such as what the Sufis and the Persians of old used to do. They used to depict the Prophet Muhammad in their poetry and stuff as praise, right? The images with their poetry, I mean, like in the whole artistic sense, right? And the Shia till today have images, by the way, till today, right? And the Sunnis don't really like to draw the face for general reasons, and that general reason relates to worshipping the graven image. That's all fine. Christianity has that heritage too. But the Shia till today do this anyway. They've got images of the Prophet's son-in-law, Imam Ali. They still have that today, right? So Islamophobia is not a helpful term for that reason, because it captures all of this. Anti-Muslim is very specific. It's real. I was at the forefront of the voices opposing Elon Musk's endorsement of Tommy Robinson for a reason, right? Stage name Tommy Robinson, real name Stephen Yaxley Lennon. Whether it's that or during the riots we just had where a mosque was attacked, again, at the forefront of speaking out against all of that, right? So let's be very specific. Yes, there is a anti-Muslim rise of hate there is a rise of anti-Muslim hate in Britain. That is true, right? And it needs to be challenged. And frankly, Nigel Farage did a good thing when he said to Musk, sorry, I'm not for sale. I'm not going to take your 400 million. I'm not going to allow stage name Tommy Robinson into the Reform Party, right? He listens. That's a good thing, because that will tank any chances Reform has of becoming government.
Yeah.
and Farage become PM. It will completely tank it. That is, and so it's right to take a clear line against anti-Muslim hate. Everything else you mentioned, these are all problems, and they're all problems that originate in a doctrine that the Blair years adopted of multiculturalism.
Yeah.
We were living together apart. We were growing together as communities apart, each in our own silos and our bubbles, not really interacting with each other. I often say when addressing this topic of multiculturalism that Georgetown professor Fathallah Muqaddam in America wrote a paper called Omniculturalism. And it's I think, for the current context we're in, it's a far better approach. What is omniculturalism? Omniculturalism says, let's celebrate what we have in common, not how we're different. Whereas multiculturalism was celebrating how we're different. Now, yes, I understand. I mean, look, I did a postgrad in political theory. There are schools of thought in multiculturalism. There's Kim Licker and there's all these other theorists. Let's talk about what was applied in Britain instead of getting carried away with the Canadian models, right?
Yeah, so what would be practical ways in our country, now that we have the state of affairs, I would say the hard right are talking about remigration. Now, I'm perfectly okay with these perpetrators of these rape gangs to be expelled from this country. I have no problem saying that. But innocent British naturalized citizens, people who've been here for generations, being forced to leave, for me, is too far. It seems to me that law and order is not actually been tried.
Yeah.
But when it comes to, and so that'd be one thing to try on a practical level, but when it comes to these different, as you describe, communities very much living out away from each other, maybe not really in much communication with each other, how can we fix that, so to speak? What's the solution to that?
Let me start by saying this whole idea of deporting everyone other than a white native Brit is not going to happen, right? So there are people calling for it.
Or remigrate. Maybe it's an online right thing.
It is. Yeah. It's not going to happen, but there will be some deportations, right? And that's, for example, like sex offenders or repeated offenders or whatever. There will be. We're going to end up seeing some. I think I'm telling you, I think that's going to happen, right? By the way, the passage in the Quran that is correctly applied to these forms of underage rape gangs is known as the verse of Hiraba. Hiraba means those who declare war against their own country. Yeah. In that passage, the punishment stipulated for those who are engaged in Hiraba, which is a specific Islamic jurisprudential term, right? As well as all form of manner of like violent punishment, which, it goes through a list of things that you can choose to do. One of them is expulsion. Right? Deportation. Yeah, literally. One of them is deportation, right? So I asked Muhammad Hijab, could this be considered Hiraba before he blocked me? He's blocked me now, right? I asked him 3 questions. He only answered one of them. And to be fair to him, it was this one. I said, in your view, could this be considered Hiraba or declaring war against your own country? He said, actually, it could be considered Hiraba. He before he blocked me, he posted that response publicly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And my point to all of them is, if you're going to say, if this is Hiraba, then expulsion from the land, deportation, is one of the Islamic sanctioned, in fact, ordained punishments for these people that engage in looting, raping, pillaging. Banditry is basically it's banditry. Mm-hmm. This all comes under banditry in Islamic jurisprudence. And that's one of the punishments, expel them from the land. Now, moving to your question.
Yeah, the question about different aspects of British society not mixing together, or just mainly British Muslims and non-Muslims.
Well, look, we're at a moment. I'm quite optimistic, despite all the doom and gloom we've just been discussing over the course of this hour. I'm quite optimistic, as I said to you once before, Win, that I think we're about turning a corner. Now, that may sound a bit strange, considering I'm probably still more cancelled than I've ever been in my life at the moment. But I think we're turning a corner.
It's darkest before the dawn.
Yeah, and I think that 2025 is going to be an interesting year. But I think we're turning a corner when it comes to this entire debate around, the failure of multiculturalism, integration, citizenship, Muslim belonging in Europe. It's got to a point now where we can't escape this question. Is there going to be a civil war, Muslims versus non-Muslims? We just had these national riots over that question. Of course, Europe isn't any better. Yeah, we're literally at that decision point. Is there going to be a civil war, and do we all kill each other, or do we figure out a solution? I think it's highly likely we're going to figure out a solution. And the solution begins with this point. There's no point, because the ethno-nat versus civ-nat debate that you've referenced earlier, the ethno-nationalists want remigration, the civic nationalists want to talk about values that bind us, yeah? And
those aren't the only two options.
Yeah, I know, exactly. That was going to be my point, right? That let's ignore all of that. Let's begin with this, that being British, or being in the context of continental Europe, being European, French, German, whatever it is, has to begin with a feeling. It has to start there, yeah? Because home is a feeling. And where you feel at home is going to be your home, right? Now, I was born and raised here in Essex, and love Essex. I left home at 16, and all my schoolmates, still in touch with all of them. And it's easy for me to feel at home in Britain. It's easy. I was born and raised here, right? But I wasn't born and raised in one of these insular communities. Especially in those days, I had the opposite problem. I was facing neo-Nazi skinheads. Because in those days in Southend, on Sea, in Essex, you could count the number of people that looked like me on one hand, right? Maybe this places me in a very interesting and unique position to address this question. But those that were born in, say, the insular communities of, say, in Bradford or certain towns and cities across the country, whatever, Rochdale, Rotherham, there is a challenge. Do they really, really feel at home in this country? Now, this is a two-way street, but it has to begin with that feeling, right?
Mm.
And that feeling, we can help it emerge through conversation and debate like this, right? To the contrary of what they fear, they meaning those that want to shut this conversation down across the political spectrum, not just Muslims, Labour, others as well, some kind of Tories in name only, whatever. Those who want to shut this conversation down, contrary to what they fear, the conversation and the debate helps build that feeling of home. Because afterwards, even if you had somebody you vehemently disagreed with over the course of this conversation across the table, and they left and you gave them a fair hearing and a civic disagreement, they'd leave thinking, that's interesting. You know, he let me speak, even if he disagreed with me.
Mm.
And then he challenged me, but politely, yeah? And that all part of that, it helps build the feeling that this is, like, for example, the debate culture we have in this country, Oxford debates or whatever. I know you participated in those debates.
And you did recently as well.
Mine was Islam. I opposed the motion that Islam is incompatible with democracy for these very points we're discussing here today. If we can somehow address the feeling question, everything else builds from there. Then what do we need to do, right? Beyond that, of course, there are a whole host of parameters that will have certain red lines as to what it means to be part and parcel of Britain. The red lines, of course, will involve you can't feel like you belong to this country if you're running around parasiting on its underage children, right? And the rest of the community, Muslim, British-Pakistani Muslim community, feels, by the way, the same about this in private. They do not endorse. The majority do not endorse this behavior. What you're witnessing is a defensiveness in public, or asabiya, the phrase I use, this aggressive tribal defensiveness, because they don't feel the same as the rest of the country. They're worried the rest of the country is going to view them as different, and it's creating this oppositional dialectic. But in private, the overwhelming majority not only reject these underage rape gangs, but would endorse the application of the verse of Hiraba that we discussed earlier onto them.
A quick interruption to your show. If you would like exclusive content, exclusive interviews, and exclusive videos, come over to the Winston Marshall Substack. It's at winstonmarshall.co.uk, and there you can interact with me directly. It's winstonmarshall.co.uk, and you'll find links in the comments below. But back to the interview. So my concern with this idea that is actually that they do, and I do believe someone like Dillu Hussein believes that he is, he does have the feeling that this is his home.
Yep.
But what I've picked up by following him on Twitter is that his concept of what that is different to ours. So he very much would feel like this. He's British, and I've heard him say things like Britain is secular. I don't think that's true. Britain's a Christian country.
It's not secular, and also I question the feeling. I question it. I know the former HT lot, Hizb ut-Tahrir. I question it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So well, despite that, can we talk conceptually about what it is to be British? It can't be just to have a feeling that this plot of land is home. There's got to be some, for example, someone who's been on the show is Catherine Burblesing. She's got a brilliant, I think it's majority Muslim actually, but her school out in Wembley, and she's united the best in the country. Yeah. She's united all these different communities through the flag, albeit a Christian flag, the Union flag. It's the three crosses on top of each other, by singing the national anthem. And I guess the monarchy. And I go further in saying that to be British is to be a participation in the heritage of Britain, which I think is an open invitation if you come to this country.
I'd go further. If you don't accept the traditions and culture of this country, you're engaged in subversion against this country, right? Britain is not a secular country. And in a sense, it shouldn't be either. And what I mean by that is we have an established church, and the monarch is the head of the Church of England. Now, everything's gone wrong with that. Everything, as you know, right? Everything that could possibly go wrong with that.
That's a whole other scandal, a whole other episode.
Yeah, now I'm not just talking about Justin Welby. I'm also talking about King Charles' relation with Jimmy Savile. Everything's gone wrong with it from the top down, yeah? But that doesn't mean that the institutions themselves shouldn't be there anymore. That's a leap. And
Agreed.
I think it's a leap too far, because radical change, and I've been a lifelong small R Republican, by the way, but I'm pragmatic on. I said it on LBC.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But I'm no. I said it on LBC. I'm completely pragmatic on that. I don't think it's a good idea to remove any of this. Right. What I mean is, like, in the context of America, it might work. I don't think it would work here in Britain. I don't think it would work to remove all of this. I think we've got to be very careful. Why am I saying that? Because what we've noticed is when you remove the moral compass of a nation that's meant to be like the spiritual guidance of that nation, you end up with a black hole, a void, and a yearning for spirituality, which is filled by materialism. And we've seen that with consumerist culture. Consumerism has overtaken spirituality for most people's preoccupation. And that's a terrible indictment on a post-spiritual society. And people often say in our US podcast friends and that world, people often say, as you would have heard as well, that culture is downstream from politics, right? And what they mean by that is, politics is downstream from culture,
yeah,
right?
Right back.
Yeah. What they mean by that is that you can't fix politics until you fix culture. And I add often one extra layer to that and say, well, correct, you can't fix politics until you fix culture, but you can't fix culture until you fix spirituality. Because if you remove spirituality, your culture ends up becoming this hollow, consumerist, empty black hole. And so the rise of online sex culture, pornography, substance addiction, materialism, shallow-minded short-termism, all of this is a result of consumerism. And it can only be fixed by spirituality. And it's why, for example, I think who was it who said it? Was it Freud? Who said don't quote me on this, but that even if the belief in God is wrong, it's useful. But actually,
Jung, I think.
Was it Jung? It was Jung. That's right. But actually, for me, I believe, right? But that's another topic, again, not for the topic of this podcast. But whether you believe or you don't believe, to recognize it's useful is quite clear. I think Tom Holland would agree with that, right? It's useful, yeah? And what we've done is we've tried to destroy the thing. But the consequences of destroying it, you can see in society. And it's very, very... So when people like Dilly or others, let's not just make it about him, say this is a secular country, what they're really trying to do is to say, get your, let's tear down the fabric of this society. This is a political struggle against the traditions and the culture of this country. And I do not think that's helpful. We need to be able to uplift the spiritual traditions of this society, not tear them down. And that's why I think Catherine School's doing well. And I'd say to fellow British Muslims that just as the official established religion in Pakistan is Islam and should remain Islam, just as the official established religion in the new Syria will be Islam and should be Islam, the official established religion in Britain is Christianity. And there should be an official established religion in Britain. And it's not going to be Islam and it's not going to be Judaism. So leave the thing alone.
Yeah.
There needs to be a religion here, right? Because if you remove spirituality from the people, you're going to see the kind of society that Prophet Muhammad came to correct. There's a reason in the Quran it says, فَبِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. For what crime was that baby girl killed? They used to bury their daughters alive in the sand, right? For what crime was she killed? And today we've got these very, very early abortions. We've got medical experiments on children. We've got forced vaccines. The same thing's coming back around again. This worship of material progress at the expense of the human soul. And COVID was the case in point for that. That's what happens if you remove spirituality from society.
Yeah. Or as Nietzsche said, we've killed God and you'll never be able to clean up the blood.
Yeah.
this is quite comical, so if I may add some comedy. Well, I think it's comical. The Emiratis have just banned 8 entities in Britain, and what's comical is the name of these entities. Maybe the Emiratis have decided to do this. They include Wembley Tree Limited, Wasla for All, Future Graduates Limited, Yas for Investment and Real Estate, Holdco. There's 8 of these entities, all based in the United Kingdom, and they've banned them because of their links to the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, this is where my white pill comes. I look at the Emiratis, I look at the Saudis, not only the Abraham Accords, the way they're dealing with Islamism. We've got a problem with that in this country, but we're too scared. Now, hopefully this conversation is help to push things along. They have no problem calling out when there's issues.
They don't ever.
But I'm worried that the British powers that be do.
Yeah.
And even that this APBG definition of Islamophobia is even that's where our discourse is. The Muslim majority countries that want peace with Israel, that want trade with the West, we want peace with the West. They have no problem calling it what it is and dealing with it. What's going on there? I know that Quilliam, maybe this is too big a question for right now, but Quilliam would obviously working on de-radicalization. That was part of your, that was probably was that not the main sort of objective with Quilliam? Where are we at with radicalization, de-radicalization in Britain today?
I had a dinner conversation a few nights ago with a who shall remain an unnamed CNN broadcaster. And we spoke about this because I think more relevant than the Emiratis and the Saudis and what MBS is doing with the opening of Saudi society, more relevant than all of that is what's happening in Syria. Because Ahmed al-Shara, or al-Jawlani, the new leader of Syria who overthrew Assad, has managed to achieve something that hasn't yet been seen in our modern history. And that is that he's led an openly Sunni Muslim battalion to take over a government while fending off ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hizb ut-Tahrir, who, by the way, were operating in Syria for many years because they were founded literally next door in Jerusalem in 1953.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
He's managed to fend off all of these groups. Let's call them Islamist organizations as opposed to Islamic. And what I mean by Islamist, again, Mr. Dilwar is saying, listen very carefully, right? I mean, and Mr. Muhammad Hijab, when I say Islamist, I mean the desire to impose one or any given interpretation of Islam over society. In Islamic terms, the desire to impose any madhab, any one madhab or maslak over society, which was never done in the history of Islam except twice, and both of those times happened in Europe. One in Andalusia to fend off the Frankish invasions, and the second was in Ottoman Turkey when they tried to, in Andalusia or Spain, it was the Maliki school of jurisprudence that they tried to synchronize with law, and in Ottoman Turkey, it was the Hanafi school of jurisprudence that they tried to synchronize with law. That was called the Tanzimat reforms. In both cases, they tried to do it because they were in severe decline, and they were trying to desperately hold the society together, and in both cases, it failed. In Spain's case, they got conquered, and in Ottoman Turkey's case, they were collapsed on their heads, and the secularist Kemal came after them in 1924 to found the modern-day Turkish Republic. The desire to impose any one given view of Islam with state law, in other words, synchronizing Sharia with law, is a modernist project. It is born of European interwar fascism. It was influenced by European interwar fascism. And they realized, the fascists, that you can't just bring Mussolini-style or Hitler-style fascism to the Middle East. It doesn't marry with the culture of the people. So they merged it with traditional Islam to create Islamism, literally create Islamism. Islamism, or this phenomenon to synchronize law with Islamic jurisprudence, was unheard of. Outside of those two examples I mentioned, which ended in defeat, it was unheard of throughout the history of Islam. In fact, Imam Malik, one of the famous founders of the 4 schools of Islamic jurisprudence, would openly caution his people, keep away from the gates of the ruler. Don't go near rulers. This was well known. All of the Islamic jurists wouldn't even want to speak to rulers. If a ruler would ask to come and see them, they say, you come to me. I'm not going to you. They would keep well away from them, right? But Islamism came about, founding of the Muslim Brotherhood first, Jamaat Islami in Pakistan and South Asia after them, with Maududi, who founded that. Hizb ut-Tahrir in 1953, founded by An-Nabhani in Jerusalem. And then, of course, Al-Qaeda with bin Laden was an offshoot of the combination of all of these, and the nexus being Egypt. Al-Qaeda being founded in Peshawar because of the Afghan jihad. And then Al-Qaeda splitting into ISIS after the Iraq War. What Jawlani or Ahmad al-Shara, the new leader of Syria, has successfully managed to do is bypass all of that from the Brotherhood onwards in forming this government. He's not Brotherhood, he's not Hizb ut-Tahrir, he's not Al-Qaeda, he's not ISIS, he's not Jamaat Islami. He's bypassed all of it while maintaining a credibility on the ground for being a religious Muslim. Now, the noises, obviously, we've got to be very careful here. We don't know how it's going to go.
But he had a jihadi background.
Yeah, he did. Just like me. Islamist background, right? But the noises he's making, if you look at this is the conversation I had with the CNN broadcaster the other day. If you look at the statements that have come out of Syria after the overthrow of Assad, they look like Quilliam press releases. Ahmad Shara talking about diversity, respecting minorities, talking about no war with Israel, talking about not imposing things on people, right? They all look like Quilliam press releases. And if you look back to the statements, now that I've said it, you're going to start seeing, oh, that's interesting. So what Quilliam proved is that you can be post-Islamist and post-jihadist. Of course, our former, you've met him, our former colleague and president, Quilliam Nu'man bin Othman, British Libyan, fought in Afghanistan, right? What Quilliam... Nu'man, yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What Quilliam...
Great guy.
Yeah. Yeah. What Quilliam demonstrates, good friend of mine, right? What Quilliam demonstrates is you can be post-jihadist or post-Islamist, still be Muslim, still care a lot for your faith, still practice it, yeah? Over COVID, another thing I did is I made a public tawbah or repentance and returned to being quote unquote practicing, because the phrase itself what does it mean? But as in, I pray 5 times a day, I fast in Ramadan, I try and adhere to my scriptures, right? Quilliam demonstrated you can be that and not be an Islamist. And Ahmad Shara is the first time you've got people from that background who've now come to power and are testing that concept. As I said, we've got to be very careful because it's early days yet. I'm optimistic that Syria will be the practical implementation of what we were proposing as Quilliam.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm optimistic because they're post-Islamists. I'm deciding from my analytical framework. Obviously, he can be whatever he wants to be. It's up to him. But my view of Ahmad Shara is he's a post-Islamist. He's a traditionalist Muslim. He's not going to be non-devout. He's going to pray. He's got his beard. He's going to take Islam seriously, as he should, by the way, because he's not going to be a Christian, is he? If we're saying spirituality is important, we hope he remains a Muslim, just like I hope Britain and the church fixes itself as well, right? We need that. So you're going to see a post-Islamist government in Syria, which I think will begin to demonstrate that these things, Islam, governance, the Middle East, that they can be reconciled. And because the Emiratis and the Saudis are different for a reason as well, because they're monarchies, right? Whereas this isn't. So it's even more interesting than the monarchies, because the monarchy, all you need really is like MBS. A young king comes along, wants a bit of a party, and he changes the country because he wants to party. It's fine. But what we really needed were people that took this ideological background seriously, as Ahmad Shara clearly does, because he's from that background, as we did, because we were from that background, and grappled with it and tried to reconcile all these ideas, right? Reconcile Sayyid Qutb's theory of al-Hakimiyya or sovereignty with modern day governance, which I know we did at Quilliam, but I can see from Ahmad Shara's statements that he's doing so. As I said, early days, this is an endorsement with caveats, but I'm highly optimistic that this is going to fix a lot of the Islamist question in the Middle East.
Well, you're brave to make such a prediction, I think, because it could go... We'll see.
We'll see.
Let's discuss that another time. I know your time is precious and you've got to shoot off to do your show. My last question then would be on the question back to Britain.
Yeah.
And you believe that Nigel Farage is the vessel, the political vessel, to unite Britain, Muslim and non-Muslim. That's something that you and I have discussed. But can you make that case for listeners?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Look, I made the case for Trump in 2020. When I said earlier in this interview that I called Trump, what I meant is this is Trump's third term. He won 2020. It was interfered with illegally. The Hunter Biden laptop story was suppressed. People that should have known better, that came from my background, the national security background, interfered and said that was Russian disinformation. It wasn't. And
that's a whole other... I mean, I although I do think that was interference, The evidence that it would definitely, it might have changed the election result. We don't know, but I definitely agree it was interference.
I think it would have, but that's not the point I was going to make.
Sure.
The point I was going to make is he won because he managed to get certain marginal votes in the key swing states. Now, there's a reason Trump thanked the Muslim vote after he won. Because in Michigan, it was the Muslim vote that swung it in his favor. Michigan was one of the key 5 swing states that he needed to win. If you look at the ethnic minority vote, African Americans, Latinos, and Muslim Americans, they surprised everybody by backing Trump over Kamala Harris in large numbers, large enough that he specifically, individually thanked each of these communities in post-victory speeches, right? Now, I'm arguing that that's what Nigel Farage is going to do in Britain. He's going to secure a surprising number of ethnic minority and British Muslim votes. People are going to be surprised by it. Just as they were surprised by Trump. And I was saying it for a long time. Trump's going to win. Not only is he going to win, he's going to get Muslim voters.
Well, the majority of American Muslims voted for Trump.
Yeah, right. So Farage is going to get that phenomenon here. Let's start with this. The so-called Labour landslide under Keir Starmer is not a landslide if you truly understand the first-past-the-post system that we're living under. Yes, he's got a huge majority of seats in Parliament, but you win those seats by winning elections in each constituency across the country. By how much did he win those elections in each constituency across the country? Well, people will be surprised to know that was the narrowest marginal victory since 1945. Starmer's victory was so marginal that the current Secretary of State for Health, Wes Streeting, won by only 500 votes. In other words, the man running our health system is propped up by a difference of 500 votes. In party political terms, that isn't marginal. That is a nightmare. That is a nightmare, right? 500 votes is nothing politically, nothing. And the person that came within 500 votes to him, Liad Mohammed, wasn't even party affiliated. She was an independent. That's how bad it is for Labour out there.
They only won 20% of the electorate.
Yeah. Now, today in the press is news that Reform is on par with Labour in opinion polls, right? And Tories are way into third place. Now, the reason Farage would get, let's call it white van man and Brexit voter, I think that's a point that we would be labouring if we went into that. It's well known why he appeals to those voters. Why am I saying does he appeal now to ethnic minority and British Muslim voters in particular? Because like Trump, Farage has listened and made the effort to say certain things that have resonated in those communities in a way that, unless you're in those communities, you wouldn't know. Through the WhatsApp groups, through the family gatherings. One of them that resonated in a way that people are underestimating is what he said right here with you on your very show. And that was when you asked him about the place of Muslims in Britain and the place of Muslims and Islam in our future as a shared identity. And he said, if you go to war with all of Islam, you're going to lose. Farage is turning down Elon Musk's 400 million and saying, I'm not for sale and I'm not going to let stage name Robinson into the Reform Party, comes after British Muslims already observed that Farage left UKIP, his own party, for the very same reason, citing Tommy Robinson. That's in The Guardian. Everybody can go. The reason Nigel Farage left his own party, UKIP, that he was leader of, was over this stage name Tommy Robinson debate. He's done the same now again with Reform. He's turned 400 million down with for coming from Elon Musk to allow stage name Robinson back in or into Reform. These sorts of gestures, they are meaningful and they resonate among British Muslims in ways that are yet being underestimated. What he said on your show about do not alienate all of Islam, do not go to war with all of Islam, it's a losing bet, that resonated with British Muslims in ways that are yet being underestimated.
So I guess what we've seen at the moment is that, or we saw at the July 2024 general election, is the rise of the sectarian, the independent, some people call it the pro-Gaza ticket MPs. I think there's 4 plus Jeremy Corbyn in the Parliament at the moment, sitting in the Parliament. And you mentioned Wes Streeting's constituency. That it seems that the British Muslims are voting for independents to represent them.
That will carry on.
What you're suggesting is that they will eventually turn to Reform.
No, I'm saying they will split the Labour vote and they will take the Labour vote, which will allow in those marginal seats that are marginal in the sense of going left or right, that will allow the balance to tip in the favour of Reform where it's marginal. because Labour will hemorrhage votes because nobody in the Muslim community trusts Keir Starmer. Tulip Siddiq, right?
Who's that?
The anti-corruption minister in the Labour government, MP, Tulip Siddiq, who beat me in Hampstead and Kilburn when I stood as a Lib Dem, right? She's a Labour MP for Hampstead and Kilburn. Tulip Siddiq is Keir Starmer's current anti-corruption minister. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is who our auntie was. Tulip Siddiq's aunt is Sheikh Hasina. Sheikh Hasina was the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. What's just happened in Bangladesh? The country has overthrown a despised, corrupt oligarchy led by Tulip Siddiq's aunt, Sheikh Hasina. Bangladesh has literally just had its Bangladesh Spring, which wasn't in our press, but take it from me. They have, as a nation, they gathered, they demonstrated, students, everyone. It was a huge thing. It was a
little bit in our press.
A little tiny bit. Yeah. But it's historic because it's also realigned geopolitically in the area. Bangladesh, after the war against Pakistan for independence, was very closely allied to India because of the regime that was there. This uprising has realigned Bangladesh closer to Pakistan. And they kicked out Tulip Siddiq's aunt, Sheikh Hasina. Overwhelmingly, Muslims around the world supported that Bangladesh Spring against Tulip Siddiq's aunt. What gets interesting is Tulip Siddiq is now currently being investigated because she lived in some houses provided to her by her now deposed and corrupt auntie in Britain. She, in other words, is accused of having benefited from that corruption. British Bangladeshis are all very, very aware of this. And they all know that she's a close confidant of Keir Starmer. She's his corruption minister, accused by British Bangladeshis of corruption. So that's an example. Just give you an example. British Muslims generally, not just Bangladeshis, don't trust Keir Starmer over Gaza. British Bangladeshis don't trust him over Tulip Siddiq and many other things, including Gaza. You've got an entire discourse building up that Labour under New Labour is very, very bad for Muslims.
So sorry, forgive me, I'm being slow on this, but it seems like a bit of a contradiction, unless I've misunderstood, which is that it's not actually that British Muslims will vote for reform and support reform, but rather, which is what I had understood earlier, but it's rather they're going to split the Labour vote. And so actually reform isn't a vessel for British Muslims.
No, it's both. So those that were left-wing and would have voted Labour anyway are not going to vote Labour. Those that would have traditionally voted Tory, and lots of Muslims do traditionally vote Tory as well, will not vote Tory. They'll vote Reform.
Oh, okay.
Those who are floating voters, Nigel Farage has captured their attention because of things like what he said on your podcast. So, and a lot of Muslim voters are floating voters, and he'll attract them too. What I'm suggesting is that Labour will underperform because they'll hemorrhage the Muslim vote, and Nigel Farage will overperform because he will attract the Muslim vote from the floating voters while also securing the Muslims that would have voted Tory.
I see. Well, Maajid, we've covered a huge amount in this conversation.
He will also be Prime Minister of this country sooner than people think.
Sooner than 2029?
I won't put a date on it, but Nigel Farage will be Prime Minister of this country sooner than people think.
There you go. Maajid Nawaz, thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's great that we've finally been able to do this, and I'm very glad that we were able to have a constructive conversation about social cohesion in our country. I know you're a proud patriot, and I've learned so much in this, and I'm sure the audience would have loved it. Where can people find you? We've already talked about your upcoming show, Cancelled.
Yeah.
That's very exciting. We
haven't
filmed it yet, right?
Yeah,
so we don't know.
But for the moment, Pete, thank you for asking. People go to Radical Media, which is majidnawaz.substack.com. Everything written, podcasts, is all centralized on my Substack for the moment.
Fantastic. And you're on all the normal social media, and we'll keep an eye out for your show, Cancelled. But Maajid Nawaz, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
You're a total star, and it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching The Winston Marshall Show. That was Maajid Nawaz. If you want to support this show, all you have to do is press subscribe. 45% of regular viewers of this show are not subscribed, and we're nearly at 300,000. With your help, we can have more phenomenal guests exploring the issues you want to hear about and the mainstream media won't touch. But until next time, be well.